Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. And thank you for signing up to this, the inaugural IRG Oracle webinar. We're delighted to see so many people signing up for this session. We've managed to draw a truly global audience, and it's great to see so many familiar names dialing in. Over the past few months, as the world's been turned upside down by the COVID-19 pandemic, IRG has been focusing on preparing our business for the inevitable recovery phase. One of the tools that we've developed to guide this process is a sort of mantra: innovate, adapt, excel. These three words have guided every activity and initiative that we've been working on since mid-March. The IRG Oracle series is the latest initiative coming out of this approach, and we have plans for it to survive long past the current crisis. We aim for this to be a growing platform of influential webinars, articles, resources that provide expert analysis, forecasting, and discussion regarding every aspect of Cayman's real estate market, whilst leveraging the opinions of some of the industry's foremost experts. So why start with webinars? Since the lockdown started, members of the IRG team have been making guest appearances as panelists on a variety of global real estate webinars, and we thought it was past time that we shared some of our insights and learnings with our own network. So without further ado, let me introduce the theme and the panelists for today's session. Our topic for discussion: surviving or thriving, Cayman's post-COVID real estate market. We aim to start addressing some of the big questions that our clients have been asking us as we start to see the curfew relaxed and we try to adapt to a new normal. And now our panelists. From IRG, broker owner Jeremy Hurst and sales and investment consultant James O'Brien. And our expert guest panelist for today, Managing Director of NCB Group, Matthew Wight. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning.
Now, before we get started, a few logistical matters for everyone that's joined us. We are trying to stick as closely as possible to our 30-minute format without sacrificing answer quality, of course. So we won't be answering audience questions live during the session. However, you can use the chat or QA functions at the bottom of the screen to ask any questions you may have. The panel will follow up and respond outside of the webinar. Alternatively, you can send us an email to info@irg.ky. The session is being recorded, and we will make it available via email and IRG's social media channels later on. You can find us on Facebook at IRG Cayman. Okay, so the first question I have is for Jeremy. You've been involved in a wide range of crisis management and humanitarian initiatives throughout the region with your roles in Rotary International and business-wise through your roles with leading real estate companies of the world. How do the Cayman Island government's response to the COVID crisis rate, in your opinion?
Thanks, Stu, and good morning, everyone. So yes, in my opinion, the country, led by a very proactive government, a highly engaged premier, a compassionate Minister of Health, and now the infamous Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Lee, has done an exceptional job to date. But I don't think this is untypical. I think it's actually typical of a Caymanian measured and pragmatic response to handling a crisis. And on this occasion, I think, as I said, I think we've done a great job balancing the health and well-being of our people with economic considerations in the real estate market, for example. We saw a similar approach in the past, post-Hurricane Ivan and post the global economic crash, where the country innovated, adapted, and, as you said, in the end excelled. And personally, I felt pretty proud to be Caymanian during this period, when our government took action early to close our country's borders, communicated effectively and factually through regular, calm briefings, implemented an impressive testing regime, and closely engaged with the private sector to ensure the economy unlocked in what most have felt has been a very sensible and fair manner, I believe. I think, having said that, what matters now is how we unlock the rest of the economy and the country, and particularly how we can safely do that, and at the same time open our borders to investors and tourists. And all indications from the Premier have been that a very conservative approach will be adopted in this regard, and a longer timeline perhaps in some of our competitive jurisdictions. However, his recent comments, most recently, have been encouraging in this regard. So personally, I believe there's great opportunities for the country to unlock in both a safe and conservative manner, but balance this to ensure that our luxury tourism and real estate investment industries are not damaged. There are clear signs that our permanent residents want to come back home. Those are not here already, but many of them did stay throughout the crisis. that new high net worth investors want to experience what we have to offer, in fact, more now than ever before, having proved ourselves, and that the Cayman Islands are increasingly being seen as a desirable safe haven and jurisdiction of the highest quality. So now we need to focus on a pragmatic and realistic plan to achieve the opening of our borders in a manner which is both safe for our people and gives a much needed boost for our economy. But I'm sure we can achieve this through strong public-private sector cooperation.
Great, great. Matthew, you're a member of the government's Strategic Economic Advisory Council. Could you talk to us about SEAC's role and how it will help to set the course for Cayman's post-COVID future?
Good morning, Stuart. I thought we weren't divulging secrets out there, but as we're on that track, I think it's important. One of my council members reminds us the importance of the C. So the C stands for a council and not a committee. So he reminds us that a camel was once a horse designed by a committee. So on that note, you know, in any crisis, you know, there equals opportunity. That's something that resonates very personally with me. There's a very well-known quote from Winston Churchill that says, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." And so I must kind of commend the Minister of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure, who has essentially spearheaded this council group, which is a private-public partnership, which is set up to process new and innovative strategies, ideas that support and strengthen the Cayman Islands, essentially. We've hammered home 4 real goals for SEAC in a very short time period. So the end goal of the first delivery is by the end of June. And so those 4 goals are to grow the economy, diversify revenue streams, mitigate risk, and essentially prepare the Cayman Islands for the next crisis, should there be one. We've also been reminded that we need to understand what SEAC is not set up to do, and that is to decide on the reopening plans, as kind of Jeremy's alluded to. That's very much a premier and the CMO's task. So we're not involved in any reopening plans, and we don't want to create sort of a wish list of theoretical ideas that's going to end up being one day a big report that's sitting on someone's bookshelf. So it's an actionable, big picture, kind of goal-orientated focus that brings a network group together to deliver on this. You know, Cayman's economy has been built on 2 real pillars over the years, and we've essentially had one of those put on pause. So what we've done is split up the SEAC into 6 sector groups, 6 industries within the Cayman Islands, of which development and construction is one of them. And so that's really the kind of the broad base idea of what SEAC's achieving.
Okay, fantastic. James, you're deeply involved with Cayman's luxury real estate market. What have your clients' reactions been to Cayman's response to COVID, and what's your take on the luxury market sector's outlook as we move out of this crisis?
Sure. Well, thank you, Stuart, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. Yeah, absolutely. Personally, I've been inundated with many clients waiting to come back to Cayman, mainly from US, Canada in particular. Although saying that, we have Asian clients and some European clients, believe it or not, that are actually looking to come back into Cayman. We update them on a weekly basis about the positive COVID story that Matthew and Jeremy have already alluded to. So they're very much up to date with what's happening there. And they're really keen to, even charter private aircraft to get here as soon as it's safe to do so. So that's a really positive step. Secondly, I feel that Cayman's luxury market has its best days ahead of itself, really. It's positioned itself very well through this, gradual closing of the immediate closing of the borders, and now the gradual opening, which will open a truly safe environment in which to invest, relocate, and come to. So that's really good news. I'm getting increased new high net worth buyers seeking, for example, villa compound type properties and exclusive penthouse properties along 7 Mile Beach. So that's more than what we would have normally have received. Also, most of my inquiries, in particular for the last 10 weeks, are seeking residency for their families. looking to relocate their private family office wealth investment offices here to Cayman. So again, you know, really exciting in this particular space, in the luxury space. And there's a real focus also on the remote enclaves. So for those that are familiar with Cayman, so like Rum Point up on the north side of the island, a lot of people are focusing on villas and, you know, with a little bit larger land, homes that are on 1+ acres, oceanfront, of course, magical views. But again, that security, safety factor of, and the remoteness of that particular area is really a high point at the moment. So not alone that, 7 Mile Beach continues to be strong, as I alluded to, and the neighboring gated communities of Vista Del Mar and Crystal Harbor, lots of interest in single family homes there. So, you know, kind of pivoting back, a lot of our main market really in the luxury sphere is the tri-state area in the United States. And if you think, and we've heard all the statistics, a lot of these homeowners have gotten out of the cities. Let's take New York, for example. A lot of them mass exodus out to the Hamptons, an area I know pretty well. And those people who normally only go there for the summer have now been, you know, stationed there for 10 weeks. So those particular individuals have now kind of gotten over their summer home, and now they want to travel. So they want to get off island, you know, off the mainland, and they want to travel to places like Cayman Islands. So we feel very strong. They're just waiting for the borders to open, and watch it happen. It's going to happen pretty quickly. So
okay, great. I want to pick up on that US and global theme a little bit more. Jeremy, you've recently taken over as chair of the Global Advisory Board for leading real estate companies of the world, and you also sit on their main board. What's the global view of Cayman's prospects, do you think, as we unlock from COVID?
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. It's been an intriguing experience to be asked to chair a global board of one of the world's leading luxury real estate networks in such interesting times, as the Chinese say. It's enabled me to really feel the pain of, for example, our Italian network members in the early stages of their devastating experience from COVID. And the enthusiasm at the end of it from our New Zealand team as they set the pace for a very successful opening up of their real estate market and economy, a model which I think Cayman has partially followed. And also to hear how the various network members in the United States are handling their challenges all very differently. Some predicting a V-shaped recovery, some a little less enthusiastic with the U-shape, and others, and mainly Democrats, I suspect, probably a long owl-shaped recovery. But anyway, the whole process has provided a really invaluable experience and perspective for me. And most importantly, I've been able to use this as a forum to tell Cayman's success story globally through a variety of means, including a webinar that James and I were panelists on last month, for example, hosted by Brown Harris Stevens, the luxury residential powerhouse in New York, where we joined experts from Manhattan, Paris, and London to talk about their markets and how they're responding to COVID and what they think the prognosis is after COVID. So we've taken full advantage of the opportunity relating to our involvement with Lead and RE. And of course, we've got a great story to tell. And I think our message has been very well received. Most everyone we spoke to about our market immediately saw the responsibilities and, the opportunities that the location such as Cayman would present as we moved out of the crisis. And in particular, they understood, you know, the benefits of a jurisdiction which once again had proved its ability to manage a serious crisis, and in the process building on its reputation as a safe, secure bolt hole. Should a similar event ever happen again, of course, and that's important. Investors are clearly nervous about this a second time round, and looking for a different level of security and safety going forward in their jurisdiction where they have their second home or where they relocate to. They also liked our nimbleness to react and our ability to effectively control our borders, especially when compared to many larger countries, and many of whom have challenges in doing exactly that. And of course, they've now learned that we've been fiscally prudent and built up cash reserves. And of course, that's very appealing as well. And lastly, as I say, our ability to and resilience to manage the crisis has very much impressed them. In the US in particular, as James alluded to, they're viewing what Cayman offers against the backdrop of a serious post-COVID backlash about living and working in crowded urban areas. And now that with remote working very well, and it's a tried and tested new normal in many ways, they feel this will encourage investors to think about relocating to safe remote, secure, less crowded locations, especially those with great infrastructure and attractive lifestyles outside their urban markets. So places like the Cayman Islands, of course. So we really do tick a lot of boxes going forward. And because of that, I'm very encouraged about how the world's viewing Cayman right now and how it will look at us as we move forward.
Great, thank you. Matthew, I'm going to turn to you now. NCB primarily develops products in the mid to upper end of the Cayman residential market, so are probably not quite as affected. But how do you feel the closure of Cayman's airports and the ports could affect the lower to middle end residential markets? And how long do you think these will take to recover?
Well, Stuart, I think the reality is this has affected everybody, you know, with uncertainty, that's what kind of really resonates with people and just in their decision making. But as you mentioned, I mean, it's specifically to the medium to higher end. You know, there's less panic that sets in right off the bat. There's that kind of comfort of Cayman and all that stability offering that has kind of calmed the nerves a little bit. So we've seen some reservation agreements that have been canceled. I think people that just were in that kind of limbo stage have decided to put their purchase on pause for a little while. Everybody's in formal contracts. You know, it's very hard to get out of a formal contract without kind of losing your deposits. And with force majeure events that are covered in a contract, usually you wouldn't see a lot of movement on those. So we haven't seen any cancellation of contracts and panic from that standpoint. And the vendors on new purchases, and perhaps Jeremy and James can talk a little bit more. We haven't seen the vendors getting softening the market in terms of taking deals or reduced buyers pricing. So, you know, we've seen some inquiries come in for that, people thinking they might get 10 or 15% off to buy now. And we really haven't seen that transpired. So it looks like the vendors are holding fairly strong on their prices, which is going to kind of stabilize the market. Where I do see kind of the challenge is, and particularly with the ports closed, as you mentioned, is in the rental market. So we've obviously seen repatriation flights. We've seen job losses, significant job losses in certain sectors. And so there's a very active rental market in Cayman, and both that short-term and long-term. So you've got overseas visitors that come in on VRBO and these types of short-term Airbnb rentals. And obviously there's been no market for them recently and for the foreseeable future at the moment. But also the long-term ones, which if you're an investor and you've invested in a number of properties in Cayman, you're reliant on your rental income. And we've certainly seen some softening there. And I think that's likely going to be the hardest hit sector for the balance of this year. In terms of the length of time to recover, you know, I really think that we're looking at about an 18 to 24 month period. You know, it's an unknown as to how long this crisis is going to go on for and how long our ports will be closed. But ultimately, you know, there will be a rebound and that stability coming back with the reopening. So if I just close on that question, a lot of times I get asked, well, what's the right time to buy? When do I buy? And you know, trying to pick a real estate market is a lot different than the stock market where you're buying low and selling high. You know, Cayman, if you look at the time, length and the value of Cayman, there's just been that constant increase in property values, very stable market. So I don't think that, at least I don't recommend to buyers that they try to pick the low, but if they're sitting on the sidelines, now's as good a time as ever to get involved. And you will ultimately see those returns once the market stabilizes and the property prices continue to increase. Great,
that's fantastic advice, thank you. Jeremy, you've been working in the Cayman and global real estate markets for over 30 years. You've seen how Cayman has reacted to former crises. What can we learn from these, and what can tell us about Cayman post-COVID?
Yes, Stu, I didn't have quite as much grey hair when I arrived in 1988. But yeah, firstly, I'd just like to say I totally agree with Matthew's analysis of where the market is right now. It's certainly going to be a tough time in that low to mid market, but I think we've got resilience. And I think that really is sort of the story of Cayman. That one word, really, resilience. You know, I recall in the 90s, we were very concerned about being hit by a major hurricane. We'd been hit by Hurricane Gilbert in '88. And in 2004, of course, Ivan arrived, and you know, we reacted, we responded, and we proved we had the mettle to not only survive, but actually thrive coming out of that. So that was a different type of event, of course. But then we're also worried about how we fare in the face of a major global recession. We took the hit, and we soon found out, once again, we were resilient, and we adapted, and we innovated. We diversified our economy, bringing in new strands such as medical tourism and the enterprise city, and invested strongly in the transition to a world-class luxury lifestyle destination. And once again, we not only survived, but thrived. So there's a pattern developing here, I think. And although the verdict's still not final in relation to COVID-19, the jury's out, and of course we can't be complacent, I think there's definitely a trend here, and it's not coincidental. And if you let me just explain a little bit about why I believe this is the reason. So I think it comes down, the reason for resilience comes down to the same reason that in the face of, as Matthew said, in typical economic hard times, we've not seen a boom and bust. And it goes back to the very fundamentals that's made Cayman successful. There's plenty of places with beautiful beaches, but I think what makes us different from all of those is human capital, or to put it another way, our people. It goes back to the character and resilience of Caymanians of old, of seafaring generations who've survived and supported the country going to sea. And out of that hardship came an entrepreneurial flair to build one of Cayman, the world's most successful offshore finance centers, and the common sense to recognize, and this is the important bit, the common sense to recognize that they couldn't do it alone. They needed the help of others. And so Cayman and Caymanians have been one of the most welcoming jurisdictions for human capital from across the world ever since. And we've grown and we've prospered because of this. Professionals, investors, visitors, tourists are always all encouraged to become part of Cayman's success story and call Cayman their home, whether it be permanently or for a short stay. Believe me, this is a very, very rare ingredient, both regionally and globally. And to me, it's this unique quality that we possess. It's one of the main reasons we've managed to be so resilient in the face of various crises. We may be small, but we're talented and we work as a team. And I think that's a great story to tell. And once again, it's personally why I feel so confident that we're going to find a positive way out of this crisis.
Okay, great. James, you've been working closely with a number of major international developers who are planning significant luxury projects for the Cayman Islands. What has been their reaction to the crisis, and how do you see it affecting their development plans, if at all?
Sure. Thank you. Great question, Stuart. Yeah, I'm very happy to report that we've one particular client that has a significant project that will be progressing in 2021. We've been working with them for a number of years now. We constantly update them on the Cayman COVID story, which we all know now is a great story. So they have a full update on happenings on the ground, so to speak. So real 100% confidence in going forward. So that's good. Two, we have I have another client that is planning a significant project as well on the 7 Mile corridor. It's full steam ahead there for the pre-planning phase. So that's a little bit, that's kind of where they're at now. Again, we update them on everything that's happening on the ground. We're actually quite involved in every step and every stage of their development. So it's giving them the confidence to go forward. And kind of generically, I would say that all of our developer clients see huge opportunity here now for the future in Cayman. And, once the market recovers, of course, they feel that now is their opportunity to kind of go through the concept, development, pre-planning phase, get all of that sort of government stuff out of the way, and launch their projects sort of 2022, 2023. That's sort of kind of the timeline, and that's pretty much all luxury pre-construction projects. I would get, point 4, I would say that kind of experience has taught us that Cayman still has a very limited luxury product offering, that today's buyers are more than willing to pay now for the quality in the right location. So, a couple of real life statistics as of this week, the global wealth of the world. Right now, there's 2,604 billionaires. There are then the ultra high net worth, which is the next category down, and that's a net worth of $30 million, and north of that, there's 265,490 of them. And then very high net worth individuals, we've 2.3, and that's a wealth of 5 million to 30 million. That's really our wheelhouse. That's sort of the numbers of people that we're talking about that invest in luxury in Cayman. And those numbers of wealthy people have grown by something like 15% year on year. So you know, when we're open, the future is very bright for those individuals to come and continue to invest in Cayman.
Okay, great, thank you.
Matthew,
we can't talk about development without me posing a question to yourself. The development and construction industry was unblocked in phases with some 65 major projects last week, and then the balance essentially this week with circa 7,500 workers now back to work, thankfully. What's your take on the outlook for the development industry going forward? Will projects fail or falter, or will the industry rebound and thrive?
Yes, you make a great point there. We're very grateful that we're actually unblocked essentially last week, starting with, you know, there's some silver linings that I've taken out over the shutdown period. You know, it's very different than a lot of other jurisdictions where they've been allowed, construction's been allowed to continue through this. So we were very much in the same situation as everybody else, where we were actually locked down. And as much as we all are competitors, the developers groups actually got together. We don't have a formal association or whatnot, but really some really great conversations and action points that came out of those discussions. And one of those is just understanding the mass and the value of what the Cayman Real Estate Development Group is like. And so we have a roughly 18 to 20 persons. You know, we assess that they have about $800 million in active sales for about $1.8 billion in projects. You know, those can stretch out maybe three to 5 years. And so we're very much encouraging the green light for us to be able to get back to work. You know, the trickle down effect that gets spoken about, when you look at $1.8 billion of projects, you know, that's roughly $40–50 million a month in spend in the economy. And that can just do tremendous, it's a tremendous value for the island, especially when we talked about earlier, you know, one of the pillars of the economy being frozen. The construction development industry really sees themselves as one of the ones that can lead the recovery plan. So that's important stats. I'm not aware of any projects that are actually destined to fail, that they won't proceed. I don't think we want to use any word about failing, but just that they wouldn't proceed. The nature of which developments get set up in Cayman is you typically don't pull the trigger unless you're really ready, not only from a planning and infrastructure standpoint, but you have your pre-sales, you have your financing in place. And so you really get to that threshold where there's a little bit more of a conservative investment approach here, as opposed to that risky investment approach where people are just going ahead with the project for the sake of going ahead with the project. So that gives them some stability, and that, you know, everybody was basically waiting for the unblocking to happen to be able to let everybody loose and get going. So I think that there's going to be a tremendous amount of activity there. On new projects, you know, I had my concerns as to whether there would be a kind of new string of projects coming out. But I think the planning department, you know, recently announced that they had some 70 new planning applications that were processed during the lockdown through virtual meetings, etc. And that really was surprising to me, but it's a great stat and an indication of where Cayman's heading. I think those valued of projects were somewhere in the realm of $60 million of additional projects being approved to move ahead. And I know they've done certain things as well with new website, virtual inspections and third-party inspections, just to make the process easier for development. So if we're going to be expected to flow this money through the economy in a short period of time, they really had to step up and be able to you know, accommodate with the requests. And, you know, that's kind of been one of the historical problems in terms of how the speed in which projects work. So that was all very positive. I think the next sector that really needs to step up for us is the banking institutions. You know, I think the banks have all done a great job in putting these mortgage holidays in place and extending out facilities. One of the risks I see is that, you know, people who think they have a facility or are in line to have a facility, that, you know, the circumstances may have changed, and if the lenders change their conditions in which they will lend to people, that could put significant risks on the closing. And as I mentioned at the beginning, you know, the $800 million of active sales, it's really important that we as a group and as a country protect those sales, and obviously financing is going to be a big part of that. So I think ultimately we'll thrive. Government, the DART group, there's a number of large developers on the island that have major projects that will move the country forward and keep the momentum going.
Great, thank you. Jeremy, I want to touch on the commercial market briefly. As the owner of Cayman's largest commercial real estate agency and consultancy, are you concerned about the effect that remote working will have on demand in the local market? I mean, what's your outlook for the commercial market over the next 18 months or so?
Yeah, good question, Stuart. It's one that we're getting asked regularly. Actually, the answer to the first part of the question is no, I'm not concerned. And it's not just due to the fact that we're all getting sick of sitting in our bedrooms and lounges and want to get back to our offices, or worrying about the cat walking in the background of the Zoom meeting. Having said that, there is justifiable concern globally about the effect that remote working could have on the commercial real estate markets of the world, and especially when it comes to office space in urban areas. But these concerns, for the most part, don't really apply to Cayman. In larger cities, for example, most people have to travel to work using public transport, crowded elevators in tall buildings, and sit in crowded cafes and public areas for coffee and lunch. And so these places are obviously not going to be as attractive post-COVID. In contrast, even in our worst rush hour, we sit in the comfort of our own cars for the most part, admiring tropical views, and then go to work in very relatively spacious, low-density office communities like Cabana Bay or Georgetown Center, in smaller, low-rise buildings, for the moment anyway. So we're not really urban in that big city sense. And most people, the travel time here, in the worst day, is 45 minutes to an hour. And many live within 5 to 10 minutes of their office or closer. So the benefits of working remotely here in Cayman are not as great, I don't think. In terms of office space being released, because of it's not being needed due to working remotely, at least in the short to medium term, social distancing will actually require more space to fit the same number of people into. So again, density of offices use of offices will change. And the most likely solution is probably some sort of hybrid shift system, with people working different hours from home and then some at the office. I mean, one of the side benefits, of course, to this would be the great news that we'll spread the traffic throughout the day, and in the process, solve one of Cayman Island's biggest pre-COVID problems, the rush hour. So office space, may well end up being redesigned to accommodate, and some tenants may choose to downsize over time, depending upon the nature of what they do. However, with most on long-term leases, any reduction will likely be spread over a 3 to 5 year period, if it happens at all. And I say if it happens at all because we also have another positive dynamic in play at the moment in the commercial office space market that will likely more than compensate for any downsizing due to remote working, and that's the new economic substance regulations. I mean, we've been signing leases for entities that need to be compliant with this throughout COVID. And this trend should increase over the coming months as the regulations are enforced. So, in fact, our overall expectation for the commercial office space market is to continue to steadily grow as opposed to decline in the short to medium term. Of course, tourist retail, food and beverage markets, as Matthew alluded to, will continue to be hardest hit. But if we can open our borders in the relatively near future, there's no reason why we won't be able to see some sort of start of recovery by the end of the year in this market as well. It will be tough, and we understand that, but we will adapt. By the way, on the commercial sales side, we've just actually gone to contract for a Georgetown office building, which is expected to close this month to a European-based investment fund. So again, the outside view of Cayman and the fact that it's viewed as being resilient and the confidence of investors is a very positive trend that we're seeing, and that's one example of that. So generally speaking, commercial doesn't tend to get hit as hard as residential in any crisis. And of course, the finance industry here is largely responsible for that. And thank you for that. But I think the prognosis is it will be a stable market over the next 2 years.
Great. I'm conscious that we have run over time a little bit. So I just have one last question for you all to kind of summarize the session. And this is essentially, will Cayman's real estate market survive, or will it thrive as a result of recent events? So starting with Jeremy, I'd like to look at the short-term view. Will Cayman survive or thrive?
Well, Stuart, I think it's pretty obvious that we will be in survival mode, as will the rest of the world for a while in the short to medium term. But the fact is, we've been doing that pretty well since the start of the crisis. So go back to my previous comments on resilience and the depth of our human capital, which I think is really significant, and our core values and strong fundamentals, as well as our recent strong performance pre-COVID, when the market was better than ever. I see all these factors come into play right now, and in my opinion, they'll ensure that we will survive, but we will also innovate, adapt, and excel and thrive as we go forward. So I would say survive in the short term and thrive in the medium to long term.
Great, thanks. James, what's your take on the medium term? Survive or thrive?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Thanks, Stuart. So I put it into two buckets. So the mid market, I think will be softer. And when I say mid market, that's the $500,000 to $1.5 million here in the local marketplace. So yeah, that pricing is going to dip well, below the 2019 figures. The luxury bucket, if you will, is going to weather COVID-19 particularly well. Sure, the volume of sales are going to be down, but I can tell you, and it's answering Matthew's question as well, that my particular vendors are remaining really firm on their pricing. So yeah, it's going to be slower market, but not a significant drop in pricing. So I hope that gives some of the audience some comfort. So yeah, to sum it up, mid-market will survive and the luxury market will thrive, would be my best guess.
Great, thanks very much. Matthew, finally, your thoughts on the long term, if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to understand that Cayman has been through crisis before in different forms. Hurricane Ivan, the economic crisis, and so this is another blip that we have to deal with for sure. I think based on the volume of projects that were outstanding and that there was a disproportionate relationship between supply and demand, where the supply was trying to catch up pre-COVID with the demand. Clearly, if the existing projects proceed, and as I said, development cycles take up to 3 years or so for a project to be completed, that this will cycle out, and thus I ultimately think we'll get in a better position where inventory will match the supply. So I see a reduced volume for the balance of 2020 and maybe even 2021, but ultimately long term, as you're asking, is going to be a thrive scenario for us.
Great, thanks very much. Well, that's all we've got time for today, really. I'd like to take a moment to thank our panelists and of course all of you, our attendees who have dialed in. Thank you very much. If you have sent us any questions through the chat tool or via email, one of the panelists will get back to you shortly. Don't hesitate to email us with any follow-up questions that you might have. Again, the email address for that is info@irg.ky. Our next webinar is going to focus on international relocation to our islands, high net worth and ultra high net worth residency, and the opportunities that the Cayman Islands offer. As a final reminder, a recording of this session will be made available on the IRG website and via our social media platforms. We'll also email it out to everybody that's registered to attend today. Thank you very much for joining us. Stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks.